I was dead when you found me. No love flowed through my veins. No sign of hope around me. Then I felt my heart beat again. Then you told me that you loved me, and my eyes came open then. Then you touched me, and Lord have mercy, you brought me back to love again. Oh, resurrection, by sweet affection, you brought me back to love again. And now I'm dying to go on living, and I'm giving you all the love I can.
Hello, everybody. All right. So I couldn't get my webcam to work for some reason on a live stream, so I decided to do it in a video form again today. Today, title of our video is Real Life Experiences with Elvis after 1977. And I'm going to read from the book called Don't Cry, Darlin by Pepper Ritter. Pepper Ritter used to work late nights, overnight, and she lived in Alaska at the time. And she wrote a book called Don't Cry, Darlin. So this is her experience with Elvis. All right, so here we go. Early in the morning on March 12th, 1988, I stopped at Safeway's for another loaf of specialty bread. It was about 3:15 in the morning. I entered at the front side of the store. Again, no cars were in the lot, but there were 3 cars blocking the west entrance to the back of the store. I rushed in and glanced to the checkout counters to the right. There was one clerk on duty. He was talking to a guy who I thought must be an employee or perhaps from one of the cars parked at the back side of the store. The kind of bread I wanted was sold out, so I simply turned to leave, and as I turned to walk down an aisle towards the door, the guy who had been at the checkout was turning into the same aisle at the opposite end. It was strange that we picked the same aisle. If either of us had turned on a different aisle, I would have missed being a part of a miracle, or if I had shopped for anything else, I would not be writing this book. I have a habit, good or bad, I don't know which, of speaking to everyone. I've always thought some people need someone to acknowledge them or give them a smile. In any case, it can't hurt anyone. This was no exception. I was ready to make a comment, even if it was a simple hello. But as I got a few steps from him, he quickly turned and reached for a can on the top shelf, so that I had no eye contact with him. I didn't take my eyes off him because I still intended to speak to him. He never turned, so I continued on. He just stood there touching the can like he was going to pick it up. About 5 steps past him, I came to a screeching halt. I just couldn't ignore what I thought I saw. Since I had already passed him, I'm surprised that he didn't hightail it out back. And it was kind of weird because she said that she kind of walked back and forth a couple times, and he just stood there looking at the can. His hand was like this on top of a can and the shelf. So I turned around and walked slowly until I had passed him. I stopped and turned around to look at him. He was still touching the same can, and it looked like he was looking out the corner of his eye to see what I was doing. Once again, I walked a few steps past him, stopped, and turned again and just stared at him. It looked like he was stuck in that position. I walked past him again. I pondered whether I should just forget it and go home. However, I just couldn't forget about it. So I walked past him again, and he still hadn't moved. She must have walked back and forth a few times. It's not my nature to be so bold, but finally I walked toward him and said, "Excuse me, you look like Elvis Presley." He didn't move. He pretended not to hear me. So I moved closer a few more steps, and speaking louder, I said, "Excuse me, you look like Elvis Presley." This time he turned to look at me. He smiled but said nothing. By then I was standing right beside him, and I nearly screamed, "Wow, you really look like Elvis." He looked directly into my eyes, smiled, stood for a moment, then grinned and said, "If you don't tell anybody, I won't." And let me tell you, my knees turned to mush. I didn't faint, however. I thought I was going to. I wonder if the color had drained from my face. There was no way to control what happened next. I actually fell into him so that he could hold me up, and I cried. It amazed me that I could manufacture so many tears in just a moment. As I held on tight to squeeze his flesh, in fact, I was squeezing and releasing my grip and then squeezed some more. It seemed like I was actually kneading his flesh. It is amazing that I still remember exactly how he felt. Feeling his flesh brought me back to reality because I knew I wasn't dreaming. It didn't matter what he looked like or who he looked like, but the fact is, he looked like Elvis. He apparently didn't think it was necessary to use disguise after so many years. But regardless, there was one thing he could never disguise, and that is his voice. It was Elvis, and he was trimmed down to the way he was before he put on all the weight. He looked great. I could feel a teensy bit of excess flesh around his waistline, but with clothes on, it's not the least bit noticeable. I was surprised that he wasn't wearing a hat. For some reason, I thought he would. I was surprised he wasn't wearing sunglasses, even though it was the wee hours in the morning. I'm confident he never expected meeting anyone. He wore blue jeans and an unbuttoned blue denim jacket over a white shirt with a few buttons unbuttoned. He didn't have any gray hair, so I imagined he had dyed it. But he looked absolutely fantastic. His hair was thick and shiny, and he had a curl over the right side of his forehead. He didn't have long, thick sideburns, but he had sideburns that were trimmed closely to his face, and they reached just to the top of his lower earlobes. I was surprised he didn't have a mustache or a beard, since it might have given him a look that wasn't noticeable. Many men in Alaska have facial hair. I thought if he was trying to disguise his identity, it would be perfect for him. But he apparently didn't think it was necessary, or he simply didn't like facial hair. I was glad he didn't. I was embarrassed by my actions, and I wasted precious time. Instead of talking to him, I had my head buried in his chest, and my fingers were kneading his back. I was actually hugging Elvis Presley, and he was hugging me, but only out of concern for me. He said, "Don't cry, darling." I was in shock. I couldn't push myself away from him. We were both standing with our arms around each other, and suddenly I realized I was putting him in an extremely uncomfortable situation. Next, I wondered how I could make this situation easier on him, and he said, "Please don't cry." But I continued to sob. They were happy tears. They were tears caused by shock, and I was totally shocked. After quite a while, I finally quit crying. Then I looked up at him. I didn't realize he was so tall. I'm 5'2", and I had to look way up at him. When I've seen him perform on TV, he doesn't look tall to me. In any case, he took a hold of my shoulders and looked down. Our eyes met, and he says, "Are you okay?" Then I did a really stupid thing because I wanted to make him feel safe. Like I said, I was still in shock. Talk about stupid. My answer to his question was saying, "You're not Elvis." He said, "I'm not? Why would you say that?" I blurted out, "Because Elvis doesn't have blue." He grinned and said, "I don't?" I continued to make stupid comments, and he told me Elvis had. I told him Elvis has brown eyes. He continued to grin, and he said, "I do?" I said that because I really thought he was wearing contacts because his eyes were brown in the poster-sized picture I have of him. I told him I didn't have all of his records. I hadn't seen all of his movies. I didn't mention the reason for that was because I never had enough funds to buy them, and I still don't. But one day I would love to have a complete collection of everything he's done, and I mean beyond August 1977. I told him I felt bad that Elvis had gained weight because it wasn't healthy. Gads! Now I have many unwanted pounds. I told him I never believed the overdose story and that he used the amount of drugs that was reported. I told him that I heard of his death, but I had a gut feeling that he was still alive, and I couldn't understand why I felt so strong about it, but I was sure it was more than wishful thinking. I told him when I heard stories that he had been seen, I was confident that he was actually still alive. I had wondered for a long time why he would fake his death. I told him I could imagine how he felt to have scads of people screaming and grabbing at him, and he must have seldom had any peace. Then I added that I just loved him. I told him I was shocked at meeting him, but I wouldn't tell anyone. He laughed and said, "It's okay if you do. No one will believe you anyway." And he laughed again. He started talking to me. I know he talked about the drugs, his weight, why he faked his death, but I only heard words, not full sentences. I was in a daze while he was talking. My eyes were blurry as I looked at him. It seemed like a curtain of gauze shielded them. They were still touching. We were still touching all the time he talked to me. I couldn't tell how many times he asked me if I was all right. He truly showed a genuine concern for me, which was overwhelming. He really is a Southern gentleman, and I must say, Heavenly Father sure put him nice together. And he was 53 and still a hunk. But even though I say this, I didn't have a crush on him, but I would have been thrilled to be his sister and loyal friend. The clerk appeared from the back of the store, and he looked up at us and he walked toward us very slowly. I was sure he was had been talking to Elvis's friends, and we moved to the other side of the aisle. We were silent while he walked past us. I couldn't see Elvis's expression because I was in front of him and we were both facing the clerk. He could have mouthed something to him and I wouldn't have known. Then he turned to the end of the aisle. Elvis said, "Are you sure you're okay?" I shook my head slowly from side to side. I was embarrassed because we continued to stand so close to each other that we were still touching. Neither one of us had said anything for a few minutes, and I'm sure we were both in shock. I imagine every time he was put in this situation, it was difficult for him. After all, more and more people knew without a doubt he did not die in 1977, and now I was blessed to be one of them. About 10 minutes after the clerk walked back to the front of the store, a woman appeared at the end of the aisle in the back of the store. She stood there for a moment and looked at us with a disgusted expression. She looked familiar. I stood looking at her, trying to determine if I might know who she was. She was about my height, perhaps an inch or two taller. Actually, I thought she looked a lot like Priscilla without makeup. However, I couldn't imagine Priscilla without makeup, even in Alaska, and she said impatiently, "Did you get the jalapeno peppers?" And he said yes. If he had them, they were in his pocket. I almost told him, "I will always remember what she asked you, because my name is Pepper." Then she said, with a frown, "Are you coming?" He told her he would be there in a minute, and she turned around and walked out of sight. Then he asked me, "Are you sure you're okay?" I told him I would be. He said, "I'm sorry, but I really have to go." I told him I understood, and he walked away. He walked slowly to the back of the store, and I walked toward the checkout. Something told me to turn around. He was still walking slowly, and I yelled, "Excuse me." He stopped, turned around with a smile on his face. "What name do you use now?" He answered, "John Burroughs." I smiled and said, "Thanks, and God bless you, John Burroughs. Have a good day. Have a good life." He smiled, nodded, turned and continued walking and raised his left arm with a quick wave. Then he looked down and I watched him until he was out of sight. When I got to the checkout, the clerk was standing there a little bit nervous, and I smiled and said, "Wow, I'm still in shock." "You are?" "Yeah, you have quite a celebrity in your store." He looked at me sheepishly and said, "Who?" "You know who." "Tell me." "No, I don't think he would want me to tell anyone, so I might as well start now." I told him I had come in for a loaf of specialty bread and was disappointed because they were sold out. However, it didn't matter. I hoped I would remember this special night the rest of my life. And then I told him it was amazing that we chose the same aisle at the same time to walk down, and if I wasn't such a friendly person, I would have missed out on a fantastic experience. I imagine there are people who have actually walked past Elvis and stood beside him without knowing it. The clerk told me he would do me a favor. I said, "When you see him, will you tell him I'm sorry I acted so stupid, but I was in shock. In fact, I'm still in shock. And please tell him his secret is safe with me." He smiled and said, "I'd be happy to." And I thanked him. And he reached out for a pack of gum and told him, "I want to buy this something so I can have a receipt of this day." He laughed and told me to sleep well, and I smiled and said, "I doubt it will happen." So when I turned out to walk out of the store, I saw a penny on the floor close to the door. I leaned down and picked it up. Just before I got into my car, I leaned down and picked up another penny. There was no one to give them to, so I put them in my pocket. It had been a habit of mine ever since I was 8 years of age to give away the pennies I found, even to the total stranger. I had been taught to jingle many. Have you heard, "Find a penny, pick it up, from now on you will have good luck"? But I added these words to the jingle: "But give it to a friend and you will have double luck." So I was happy to have good luck, but I thought it would be nice to give the luck to someone else, especially if I were to have double luck. And I was always afraid I would forget to give the penny away. Because I didn't know when I would see a friend. So right then and there, I made a decision to perfect stranger could be my friend. After I picked up the pennies, I found a simple I simply walked to the first person I saw with my hand held out to them. They in turn reached for my hand, and bless their hearts, they stood listening to me speak the words of my jingle. And for the first time I did, I was greeted with the kind words, thank you, smiles, and some who said they had never heard the last part of my jingle. I was happy to tell them I made it up because I wanted to give others good luck, and besides, I then would double my luck. And you know what? The moment we spoke, we were no longer strangers. We were friends. And I'm going to stop there. But she had said that she kept the other penny, and come to find out it was the year that she had an encounter with Elvis, and she kept her receipt in her drawer, and she kept the receipt for the gum so that she could remember the date of that day. um, I had I was able to talk to her on a three-way call with my good friend Jim on our group page, and we had a great conversation as she was telling me about that. And I was telling her I couldn't help but laugh when she told him he had brown eyes. But I remember the photographs that she was talking about, or the posters, that his eyes were actually browner than blue, or some pictures his eyes were brown instead of blue. Well, Jim, who is a family member, told me that he had glaucoma and that darkened his eyes. Then he had to wear sunglasses because it hurt his eyes. The light hurt the blue of his eyes. And then I heard that he wore brown contacts sometimes when he did concerts because the lighting it hurt his eyes. So if he wore brown contacts, his eyes didn't hurt as bad. So the pictures that she had him with brown contacts on. So she thought he had brown eyes. And I used to do the same thing and say, doesn't Elvis have brown eyes? And then I saw other pictures where Elvis had blue eyes. And then I found out Elvis really did have blue eyes. It's just that he had to wear darker contacts during the time he was treating his glaucoma. As people with blue eyes have sensitivity to light, bright light. But, Pepper will always remember that memory. Imagine meeting him in 1988 and actually hugging him and crying on his shoulder. She said his shirt was covered in her tears when he was done. Like his jacket, his blue jean jacket and everything was soaked, she told me, on the phone. And she said, I could not believe it. She was so embarrassed because of crying on his shoulder, and it must have been a good 15-20 minute visit because it took me 20 minutes to read it. And so those of you that say that he's not alive, how do you explain the real life meetings that people have with him after 1977? How do you explain that? I have group members who had questioned that, had actually said he died in 1977. Well, his image died, but the body, the man, did not. And then they're like, well, I don't understand if he did that. How could he do that to his family, his daughter, his father, and all his fans? How could he leave them all high and dry and lie to them like that? He's an honest man. Well, Elvis is an honest man, but Elvis also had a lot of problems. And he did it to extend his life so he could be there for Lisa Marie. And Lisa Marie knew about it. She found out, he said, according to his book here, in this book, that she found out a few months later, but she wouldn't see him much. As a matter of fact, Dr. Hinton had mentioned that he moved a lot. He was in Alaska in March of 1988. Also, The Spelling on the Stone came out in 1988, and then he was found also in 1988 by this gentleman on Thanksgiving. and I think I read this the other day on the other live stream, burn. And his description of him was quite interesting because a very similar description that Pepper said. He said he was wearing blue jeans. Let me see. Let me see if I can find it again. The only difference was blue a denim jacket and blue jeans and boots. But the difference is that she said his hair was dyed black, and that was March. This is November. His hair was white, white, white. So his dye must have, disappeared. There's another video that we have on our page here, and it's called The Interview. That's from Spelling on the Stone, where he arrives with different cars and guards or men or friends that accompany him into a recording office with a tape, and he gives it to the person at the desk. The description of his clothes was not the same, but the second time he came, December 8th, 1988, her description of him was he had a little black with gray. So he must have dyed it again, and he had gray streaks in his hair, and a mustache, and jeans, and a white shirt, and a jean jacket, but gloves, different gloves. So, yeah. Okay. And the possibility that he could be wearing like some type of hair piece or something that might make him look different, maybe. We don't know. Anyway, so there was some real life experiences that people had in 1988. How do you explain if you guys, any of you who's claimed that he's dead, how can you explain to those people that they actually talked to a ghost? If they actually held him, touched him, cried on his shoulder. I mean, how can you guys say that? So, he is there. He's still around. It's just that we just got to keep our minds open to the possibility. And there was also sightings in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I have a picture of Elvis. In his early years, they said that he had purchased a hotel before he died in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And a woman had actually searched for a John Burroughs who owned that hotel and had an encounter with him there. And that was in 1988 as well. And in the recording and the interview, he had said to the secretary that he had read Christy Lane's book in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So, he is alive and well, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you found it of value, please subscribe to the channel, hit the alerts button for current content, and share it along the YouTube logarithm, and favorite this video or like this video if you're watching it on Facebook. We're also open on Twitter now. We are under a address there. I'll put that in the description. And we are on Instagram as well. So you guys have a great night. I'll talk to you later. Bye.